So this Cummins 12 valve is probably close to about 1,000 pounds without the transmission on it, and I'm kind of interested in building a stand for it so that the engine could be somewhat mobile, at least by dragging with the tractor, or I could set the engine on a trailer and transport it that way, or also to use the stand as a work platform and maybe even fire the engine up on the stand. So here is some steel, and it had been used for something else, and I think there's enough here I could cut it up and make the stand with it. So here's some additional pieces that will be used for the actual engine mount itself. So that's some 3-inch square quarter wall, and here's some 3-inch angle. So I've got 2 of the angles clamped back to back, and one of them is marked with a pre-drill. So I have 2 more to drill, and I would like them to have a hole like this one. So I'm going to clamp these 2 together, and then I'll use this hole as a pilot to drill into the next one, and then I'll repeat the same procedure for the last angle. So that's kind of how these pieces fit together. So here I've got an engine mount that I'm using as a jig, and I've got 2 angles bolted to the engine mount, and I don't have them bolted very tightly. See, I can turn this bolt. I don't want to have everything clamped tight and then welded together like that. So I want to have this to be able to assemble and disassemble nicely off the stand later. So I'm basically ready here now to give this 3 spot welds, and same thing on this angle. And then once these are nice and secure, then I want to remove the engine mount so that I don't get the rubber too hot, and then finish off that welding. So I started cutting up some steel this morning, and this material that I'm working with is 3/8 by 2 inches. So I've done this damage in the past from putting too much heat onto the floor. So this project, I'm propping it up on some wood here. And so this is the base frame, and I've got it ready to weld together now. So I brought the welder out here on the grass. It's a nice calm night for our welding. Thank you, Jesus. And so this is how it's kind of turning out. So the engine ultimately is the jig for the stand, and I didn't really have a decent way to transport this thing to the shop to do the welding there, so that's why the welder ended up out here on the grass. And so started off by setting everything up on setting the engine up on blocks, and then still had a little bit of tension here on the chain as a safety, and then started fitting parts together. And those bump stops that came off the back of the Dodge, there's one here, so it sits underneath that adapter plate, and then the other one, it sits in the front here, and it's just up underneath that air conditioning bracket off to the side. So I kind of wanted it so that the oil pan was removable once it sat on the stand. I think if the transmission is on the engine, then this bump stop here will have some weight on it, and this one will basically be loose. And if the engine or if the transmission is off, then likely this one will have some weight on it, but the primary load will be done by the engine mounts. So that's how the mounts turned out. They were welded in the shop, and I didn't have to weld them out here. And also the square frame perimeter was welded in the shop along with the corner bracing. That was also done inside. So I haven't finished welding it yet. I'm actually thinking of pulling it off the stand now and then take it back into the shop and finish welding. So fortunately, after After I got this far, the bolts are still loose, so there's no binding, so if I pull it apart it should basically stay put. This one is a little tighter. I can still move it a little bit tighter. So I think what I'll do, once I have the engine off of there and I'll move this thing to the shop, what I'll do before I finish welding, I'll just put a temporary brace from here and then to the other mount, just like a cross, in case it wants to pull as I finish the welding, just to kind of hold it in place, and then remove it when the welding is finished. So that's how it's turned out so far. It's a bit of a contraption, guys. So down on the bottom I put those skid rails, and they help to also level it off, because after this thing was all welded, that perimeter frame, it got kind of a little bit twisted, so it would kind of rock, you know, on the concrete. I would prefer to have the square tube for the perimeter. So I'm ready to put the engine on here now and give it a load test. If it's fairly, I think it's going to be reasonably stable. See, the idea was to make it triangulated. You see, they tip in, and then that helps to, you know, keep it from wobbling side to side. And then these are triangulated kind of like that, and plus the bump stops. Well, we'll see. I'll put the weight on. Okay, all the weight is on the stand now, but it was a bit of a challenge to get it on there, because after all that welding, the bolt holes had moved in about a ½ an inch more than what they were before. So after using this jack and a real big hammer for a while, then the engine mounts came back into shape. Now it's fitting pretty nice, and I was just wiggling on this whole assembly here before, and it's mostly the rubber that is wobbling around the mounts, and I do see the frame flexing a little bit, but I mean, we're talking, there's probably, with the transmission, there might be 1,200 pounds on there right now, so I think it's pretty stable. It does wobble slightly. In this bump stop in the back here, there's definitely some weight on there. See if I can make that thing bounce a bit. Yeah, you see it wants to compress. Okay. So now I want to see what happens when I hook the tractor to this thing and drag it around the yard a little bit and see how it responds.